Welcome back to another Dawn of the Data Age lecture. In the series today, we're going to be talking about creating data-driven customer profiles. So I do want, right from the beginning, to make something in the terminology clear because we're going to cover both terms and I don't want one to be confused for the other. I'm talking about a profile today. I will also talk about personas. I do not see them as the same thing. That is, these are terms that people will use interchangeably. I think that's sloppy. I think that a persona is a subset of the profile. And so today when I'm talking about the profile, most of it is going to be talking about this whole data picture that you create on a customer. At one point, I will bring in the persona framework because it is an excellent framework for extracting some information from the profile for the purposes of marketing or UX design or customer experience engineering. But they are separate things. So if I'm sloppy in my terminology and I cause any confusion, you have a question anytime during this, just jump on, unmute yourself, throw it up in the chat window. We have somebody monitoring it, and we'll answer it as we go. But I will try to be very clean in my use of those two terms to avoid any sort of issues. For those who are joining us for the first time, I'm Luciano. I'm the founder and CEO of Emperitas. We're a team of economists and data scientists delivering bi-weekly customer lifetime value intelligence. I'm also the founder and director of the Utah Community Research Group at the University of Utah, where I teach a lot of econ-focused courses, data science as well, and also applied research. Like the other lectures in this series, there will be 3 parts today. The first is going to be teaching the benefits of profiling your customers. The second I'll dig into are the metrics for creating, and I'm not going to talk about a specific metric like customer lifetime value very much. I'm going to talk more in this section about the sources of data that contain many metrics for the profile, because the point of a whole customer profile is creating a very wide set of information about an individual. And then third, I'll explain the analytics used to create data-driven profiles, and I'm testing something today in this lecture series. I'm going to talk about very specific analytical methods. I'm not going to talk in much detail about how to do them, and I'm not going to show you the math behind any of them. But I would say that this is a step up from all the lectures to this point. And I think that's in part because we've been doing this now for almost a year, and we're just starting to hit the limits of the base information, the foundational information that we can provide to you. It's time to start to expand into a little bit more advanced topics, and I think we definitely accomplished that in that third section today. So let's talk about the benefits of profiling. If you need proof that there is immense value in profiling a customer, all you need to do right now is look at what is happening with the general data regulation in Europe. 2 years ago, despite everything that's happening in the world, the entire EU was able to get together to pass a law that says that as an individual customer, as a member of the EU, first off, but as an individual customer of any business anywhere in the world, you own your data, the business does not. That's the basic premise of this law, and it takes effect in May of this year. So you're probably hearing a lot about this right now, but if you need proof that there is value in profiling a customer, just think about what that took for the EU to pass a law that says that you own your own data. And I think, like many laws, it's flawed. I think its general premise and approach is true. You should own your data. You don't right now. You give it away to Facebook. Look at what's happening right now with Facebook before the Congress. Because there is immense value in understanding the individual customers. And the best way to do it is through data. And with the rise of digitization, the digital transformation that we've talked about before, it's very easy to get lots and lots of data about people. And ultimately, I think it's a good thing for the world that you as an individual own your data right now in the United States. And by the way, even if you're not operating a business in the EU, and you don't have a physical presence there, so say you're a domestic, you're only here in the US, but somebody in the EU visits your website and starts getting tracked by your cookies from your inbound marketing software, and you start collecting data without telling them what's going on, you are subject to fine. The EU is coming for you individually. So this is a big shift. It will be followed around the world, and ultimately, you will have to buy this information on a market like anything else. But right now, in the United States specifically, for domestic customers, there's really not a lot of regulation about this. And many people are giving away their information willingly, even if it's through ignorance. And it has real power for the business. So what is a profile? I said I would define this and differentiate it from a persona. When I say the word profile, I am talking about the most complete collection of data that you can create on an individual customer. Now, how does that differ from a persona? Basically, a persona just uses a portion of it. There's going to be a lot of other information about a customer that you have that you're not going to use for the persona. So why would you care? Why not just collect for the persona only? So the difference between a profile and a persona is that the persona is only going to use an abridged version of the profile. And you're going to be able to relate and act on that persona. But it's going to be for narrow focus. It's going to be for UX design or customer experience design. It's going to be for marketing purposes, maybe for sales. It is not the full picture of data that you have on a customer. And that's really important. Because, again, some of that data might be used in other processes. You may have regulation that you have to comply with that requires you to collect some of this data. It may be that you're collecting data that you don't know is useful at the moment, but you think is going to be useful in the future. It could be data that you want to collect just for personal interest, to understand customers beyond the persona. They're separate things, is my point. The profile is a separate thing from the persona. But the persona is often the more useful part as long as it's built on a good profile of data from the customer. Well, why would you go through all this effort beyond compliance? If you have to comply, then you're going to do it. But beyond compliance, there's a lot of value in this data because it allows you to create a more personal relationship with the individual customer. And this is consistently ranked among the top 3, often the top spot, of most important factors in creating a customer experience, a positive customer experience. So when you talk to customers and you say, what is it the organization could do to create a better experience for you as a customer? They will talk about things like being available, responding quickly. Those are really low. If you're not doing that, then you're just waiting for a competitor to kill you. That's just stuff you should be doing. Personalization takes a lot of effort. And yet that's the next thing that they always say. Personalization, and it's creeping up. It is, like I said, sometimes the number one thing that they ask for. They want to be understood as an individual. Data allows you to do that. However, if you go too far, and this is the danger with personalization, if you go too far, you creep people out. How that happens differs by customers. So some customers are really creeped out when you know personal information about them. Some customers are really creeped out when you know personal information about their family. That one seems to really trigger stuff in people. In fact, if you go follow this link, there's a video that's in the bottom left on this slide. If you go follow that link, there's an embedded video in the blog page where they go to some spot and they interview people and they talk about customer experience and they talk about specifically what would creep you out. And one of them in the video says something about like, well, if you knew stuff about my kids, that would be a little too far. So you have to know the customer's level, the threshold for the personalization. It's not just about creating a personal experience. You have to know how personal that experience should be by individual, which gets pretty difficult. Now, there are 4 kinds of customers that you should be profiling, and this is where a lot of organizations, they only tackle the first one, which is their own customers. And that's a mistake because there's a lot of things that you can learn that are strategically important that bring real quick ROI by understanding these other groups. The second are competitors' customers. The third are nobody's customers. They're not customers yet. And the fourth are never customers. They're never going to be your customer or your competitor's customer. Knowing about them is actually really useful. This is the negative keyword approach with something like paid search. It's not just who you're hoping to find, it's who you know for sure you don't want to bother talking to. You don't have what they want, they don't care. Those are really important people to understand as a group. Now, the purpose of understanding all 4 of these is that they have different places in a timeline. So with your customers, you can go talk to past customers and present customers. You can profile both. That's really helpful for predicting the future. But they're already your customers, so you're really predicting whether they'll churn out or not. You're not predicting that they'll become a new customer in the future. There's no way to talk to new customers from the future, right? Well, you can do it sort of with the nobody's customer group. You could talk to them about barriers to entry or things that they need, perceptions. You can start to build profiles on that group to predict that they will become a customer, and then once they are your customer, you're talking about churn if you're talking about the future. With the competitors' customers, you have the same kind of thing. They're either going to be past customers of that organization. Those are really helpful. Understanding their opinions and profiling them is very helpful for you if you are in a highly competitive market. And then you can also talk to current customers of your competitors. I've said this many other places in these lectures. The use of frameworks is key to getting value out of data. People don't understand data. It's a poorly taught subject. I've said this many times. Statistics is the worst taught subject in higher education. I'm saying that as someone who is embedded in that world. And so if you don't have these simplifying frameworks, it's basically the foundation of a story. It's something you are forced to put the data into to tell a story to somebody. It's the chances that you'll actually extract the value from this profiling are pretty low. Now, the best frameworks to use, I've said this before, customer journey and personas are two at the top. The other is CLV. And customer experience managers in particular don't seem very interested in monetary value. There's a lot of emphasis right now in customer experience as a field. And I'm assuming that many of the people who are joining today are coming in either from CX teams or they work with CX teams. Sometimes these are called customer success teams or customer service teams. But these are basically the people within the organization whose primary world is interfacing directly with the customer and understanding them. And I think that there is a severe lack of robust data in CX in general right now. They're using data because they're using surveys primarily to get this information. They are not data-driven as a field overall. Within the organization, I think the product teams are the most data-driven. I think it's followed by marketing, then it's followed by CX, and then it's rounded out last by sales. And so if you're only focused on talking to the customer, it's easy to and you'll see this later when we talk about empathy becomes the benchmark for CX, understanding empathetically your customer. And that's great, but you're still a business, and you still operate in a market. And if in that market you are not profitable, you will cease to exist. And there are few metrics out there that give you insight directly into whether or not that pattern is happening beyond customer lifetime value. In fact, it sums it up better than any of the others because it will show you we spend $3 for this click. This cost of acquisition of this customer is $3. They bring us in their lifetime $9. If we know our operating costs, so all of our fixed costs, variable costs, we can do all that cost accounting, which is possible to do. We can figure out if this actual click brings us profit as an organization. And if you're not operating at that level of precision, again, a competitor is going to come in, and the phrase is eat your lunch. But the other thing that's so valuable about CLV is that it's actionable for each of these departments. Marketing can arrange its strategies around it. Sales can arrange its strategies around it. Product should absolutely be making its strategies based on customer lifetime value, and CX needs to bring this in more. The other thing that you have to understand is customer preferences are changing rapidly. This is something that has emerged in the last really 20 years, I think in large part because of technology. It is very hard to keep track of customer preferences right now. And when they change, it can be very rapid. But the rate of change itself is also increasing. Now, in economics, this is termed intertemporal substitution. And basically what it says is people's preferences for something do not just happen in one time period. It's not just about today. So if your CX strategy is only talking about that present group and you're not looking at that past group and trying to predict that future group, you're going to get caught off guard at some point. Your luck will run out. Because individual consumers do not make decisions in a single time period. They are taking into consideration at any moment what has happened in the past and likely what will happen in the future. And so those preferences change moment by moment and over time. So you have to have this approach to profiling that it's not a one and done thing. You don't just do it once and that's the end of it. You have to continually do this. Now, what about the metrics themselves? Okay, those are the benefits of profiling. This is why you would profile. It's why the European Union passed this general rule on data protection. The value is there. The benefits are real to the organizations who do this well. But what metrics, what kind of information can actually be brought to bear on profiling a customer, creating that fully complete data picture of an individual customer, and then extracting things like personas from it? So we're going to go into each of those piece by piece. But because, again, I said that I expect many of you have a CX background or a connection to customer experience, another thing you should know about metrics when you start to go down into this path is that the first one that's probably going to be pushed in your face, and it's not a bad metric. I want to make that clear. I think Net Promoter Score is a fine metric. You can go read my article on LinkedIn. It's linked there in the bottom left. I make that case. Net Promoter Score is a good metric. It should not be the top. It is a tyrant right now in organizations. So much of the strategy is based around Net Promoter Score, and it's because word of mouth recommendation is powerful. Still the most powerful marketing channel. It is a good benchmark for understanding whether you're going to grow or not. But you can grow unprofitably. You can go buy yourself into bankruptcy with clicks and impressions on social media, on paid search, on traditional. You can go put billboards up and go right out of business even though you're getting a lot of customers. Why? Because they don't bring you any profit. So Net Promoter Score, which is a subsection of the data that goes into customer lifetime value calculations, because there's a monetary and a non-monetary calculation component, it's there. It should be included. It just shouldn't be at the top of the list. And it really has turned into a dependency within organizations. All right, well, let's talk about the dimensions that all of this data can fit into. And I do want to be clear, because we have people who've been joining us for many, many of these past lectures. I am not talking about, with this slide, the 4 data definitions. So there's another slide from one of our other lectures about interpreting data like a pro, which is on our YouTube channel. And I think on our blog, on our site, it is on our blog as well. If you go there, I'm going to talk about 4 ways to differentiate data, right? The origin, the scope, the totality, and the measurement. That is not what I'm talking about here. Even though the number 4 shows up again, it's not the same thing. Dimensions from a database architecting framework are whole connected sets of data. They all are connected because they have some sort of business problem that they solve. And you do it that way because you're going to be querying within that information a lot, and you might not have to query some of the other information. So if you're the marketing team, you might be querying the marketing engagement stuff a lot and not doing much with price sensitivity. Those are different dimensions. All the data related to those things should live in different ways because you're going to work within them and not across them very often. And so when I talk about these 4 data dimensions, which is the backbone of everything that follows from this point in the lecture, including all the analytics, I'm talking about broad types of information that fit into mental frameworks again. The term in databasing is actually dimensions. So what are they? And I've mentioned these 4 in many other places in this lecture series. Product, price, message, and channel. The product usage preferences, the price sensitivity, and those are separate things. Okay, value, price is related to value, preferences are related to value. Those 2 things together show you value. They're not totally the same. Marketing engagement, this is channel mix, so this would be marketing mix. This would be attribution. This is what is working, both on a message standpoint, which can be visual, it can be copy, written copy, it can be the day-time combination. You're sending out a message. What is that message? And then what's the channel related to it? And then the 4th part is CX research. Now, the first 3 of these are mostly derived from observational data. So if you remember when we talked about those 4 types of data, and we talked about origin, survey was one type of origin. Well, CX research is going to come from survey. Price sensitivity, some of it will come from experimental design surveys. But most of the data for the first 3, the product, price, and marketing, those are going to come from observational, machine-to-machine data capture. Now, these 4 things also fit really neatly into the customer journey framework. They have overlap, but they fit very well. They can be explained very well through that framework. So let's go through each one individually. So with product usage, the data that you need for this can come from national product databases. So often it is possible if you are a member of some sort of industry level association. So the National Retail Federation is a good example of this. There are these large non-governmental bodies that govern whole industries. They set standards and best practices. They host conventions that everybody comes to. And they often provide data. It is worth getting that data because it helps you understand the market that you are part of. Your organization is only going to be a little teeny piece of some much bigger vertical, is usually the term that we use in the business world. Well, that vertical is going to be part of a whole sector, which is a term that's used in economics, and then that sector is going to be part of the bigger economy, and all of that stuff affects you. Might not affect you a lot, but it still affects you. And that data is just sitting there, and it can be used to understand your customers overall. The second are observational events data. So if you're a SaaS product, this is a really good component because this is just getting generated all the time by your tool. It's there in a database, you can mine it, it's wonderful. If you don't have a SaaS product, but you do have a product, you still are going to have a lot of observational data about its sales, its over time, stuff that you can pull the product information out of. For the actual purchase and other things related to sales, which you can figure out from preferences from, you can get that from the CRM usually. Technical support ticket data. So if people are calling and having an issue with a feature within your product, that's a pretty good indication they're using it. And so you can bring in all of that technical support data to try to understand what they are or are not using to understand those usage preferences. And then next is primary research. You can always go out. Any data you don't have, you can go out and get in the world. This is usually through qualitative, sometimes through quantitative, and I'll talk about those too when I get to the CX research, but that's 5 different sources of massive amounts of data just for understanding product usage. There's that national level that's outside your organization. There's your observational events data that is only yours and nobody else has it unless you're selling it to the national data set as part of your obligation, and then some e-commerce companies do that. You've got your own proprietary purchase and CRM data. You've got your own proprietary technical support data, and then you can always go out into the world through primary research and get more. But all of this should be focused on understanding the preferences for the product that you have through their actual usage, not just what they tell you that they like, but what are they actually buying, what are they actually using, what are they actually calling to get tech support on. Because that's stuff that they prefer over everything else that's available to them. What about price? And if you go to this link in the bottom left, you'll see this animation. I had to press this down to a PDF, and unfortunately it didn't carry over the animated GIFs. But the Q-sort algorithm is a really great way for getting at price sensitivity. But willingness to pay, which is what you are asking for with price sensitivity, is the single hardest thing to answer. It's not just hard. Anyone who does market research, or specifically marketing research, who's done conjoint studies, can appreciate how hard it is to figure out what somebody's actually willing to pay for something. In economics, this shows up on PhD qualifier exams. You have to show the difference between willingness to pay and willingness to accept. And mathematically, they are almost always different. There's only a few really constrained situations where that's not the case. And this is because value is subjective, and price is just one powerful component of value. And so understanding this, you can't just go to somebody and say, well, you can. Let me back up. You can just go to somebody and say, hey, Adam, how much would you be willing to pay for this app? $5 a month or $10 a month? And he might tell you roughly, yeah, I'd be closer to $5. But it might turn out that he's actually like $8.50. If we really put him through some price optimization experiments, it might turn out that he's actually like $8.50. So by going to 5 instead of 10, because qualitatively we got there, we're losing $3.50 every month on Adam. If there's 1 million Adams in our customer base, that's a lot of money. And so I will admit that I have scoffed more than once when I've been on LinkedIn and I've seen somebody post. There seems to be a reason to brag about this. I don't know why, among SaaS companies, to brag about that they sort of just pick the price and it worked out in the long term. And that is definitely one way to go. But there are really powerful tools. Q-sort is one, and that's what this animation will show you, is you can take a data set like this over to the right. Let's assume that's all people's willingness to pay. Well, if you just grab the average, let's say that you grab the average and it's about a third of the way up that vertical axis. Every black dot above that was willing to pay more for your product. Now, you might lose a couple sales if you increase the price level overall, the average price. But if you're capturing all those people with really high willingness to pay, that's profit. And it's profit that they, by the way, are totally happy paying for as customers because they value the product much higher than what you're actually charging. And that spread, that difference over time across many customers can be massive. And so understanding it's DCMs, just as a cost limitation, the most expensive discrete choice model that you'd ever have to buy as a company is probably $200,000. I can introduce you if you'd like, send me an email, to the people in the world who are literally the best at discrete choice modeling. They happen to be here in Salt Lake as well. They're world experts at this specific method of analytics. $200,000, and they will take care of you on that project. They'll hold your hand. They will do an amazing job. That's it. That's the upper limit. So $350 on an atom that we're missing every sale for millions of atoms, that's a very large ROI by understanding it before we actually set our price and just kind of stumble to it. And that's because willingness to pay and willingness to accept are not the same thing. By the way, Q-sort is a very cheap way to do this. You basically offer sort of bundles instead of a whole experiment, and then you use the sorting algorithm. What the Q-sort algorithm will show if you go follow that link, and I encourage you, I wish that the animation had worked, but follow that link, go there, and it will show you it's an algorithm that will organize this entire visual to the right in ascending order pretty efficiently as well. It looks like we have a question here in the room from Tom.
So, what's the difference between willingness to pay and willingness to accept?
Okay, well, that's getting a little bit in the weeds in economics, but I'm happy to go there.
Just quick.
Yeah, so the difference between willingness to pay and willingness to accept is if you took an exchange and you put somebody on either side of it. So you and I are going to sell, let's say that I got a lawnmower that I want to sell to you. Okay? I'm the seller, you're the buyer. Mm-hmm. Your willingness to pay for that lawnmower is going to be lower than if we switched roles and now you're the seller and I'm the buyer and I had to pay you to get rid of the lawnmower. Those two values will not be the same, even though they should be. We're just switching places on if the item's value is really being determined perfectly by a market because it perfectly represents the actual value of whatever's in it, the total social value of all the inputs that were used to put that lawnmower together, then being on the different sides of that exchange shouldn't matter, and it does. That's the lesson. It does matter. And so this is why discrete choice modeling was invented. It was invented by an economist who wanted to figure out people's preferences in a way that he didn't have to ask and then tie that to pricing. And by the way, all those people, when I said imagine a line that's a third of the way up this chart, right? Just go from left to right, just red line it across. All those people that would drop out because you increase the price compared to all the people who would pay that bigger difference that they're willing to pay, that's when we talk about elasticity in economics. You may have come across that in business. You're looking for a situation where there is elastic. You're looking for a situation where there's inelastic demand. So you can increase the price and it's not going to change the quantity purchased, which means you're going to capture that extra profit. You might lose a couple customers, but the value that you gain from all of them is much, much higher. And so this is why discrete choice modeling was created, to get at price sensitivity data. But as a dimension, this is one of the most important. And there's other things you can do. I didn't put competitive intelligence in here, but often it's not hard to figure out what your competitors are charging. And if you've looked at a whole market and you've figured out that 7 or 8 competitors are there and they're all operating within a pretty reasonable margin, that is, at least right now, from the current approaches, probably pretty close to the real market value. That does not mean that they're operating on perfect information. It does not mean that you can't come in and figure out a better way to sell at a potentially lower price and capture huge portions of the market. And with DCM data, by the way, I mean, $200,000 is not an insignificant amount of money, but the most powerful thing that you can do with it is that that data allows you to then build market simulators where you can look for this kind of inelastic demand, and you can actually watch market share because you can include brand as one of the attributes in the experiment. And so you can see that if you increase the price, will people leave from you? And not only will they leave from you, where do they go? They go to your competitor, or they go to this competitor. And then that opens a whole world of game theory that is just incredibly powerful, and I don't think many organizations at all are even doing it. DCM is probably the most underrated analytical method out there. What about marketing engagement? So we've talked about product, we've talked about price. Those things are often expressed in marketing. So even if you can't change your product, so I should have mentioned this on that slide. Of all these dimensions, product is the hardest one to react to, unless you're a SaaS company. This is the beauty of SaaS companies, is you want a new feature, it's 1 or maybe 2 quarters away. They might take 1 quarter to divide it up into epics, divide it up into user stories, and then another quarter to actually implement it. And then it's deployed, it's out in the world. That's not true with automakers. If those consumer preferences change, they suddenly want trucks, they suddenly want Hummers. Think about the whole Hummer craze. That was created by Arnold Schwarzenegger. Who saw that coming in the auto industry? That suddenly there would be this massive demand for Hummers in the 90s. You can't necessarily change your product quickly. What you can do, though, even by understanding the preferences, is just change how you market it. You can highlight the preferences, the features, or the product components that have the highest preference in your marketing. You can do that right away. So it's still worth understanding that dimension, even if you can't change your product. And we've encountered that a lot as a company where we've come into organizations. We always ask 2 questions. This gets to the creating a data culture lecture that we did, and it gets to the SMART goals. Right? One of the questions in the SMART goals is not just what do you want to know, it's how are you going to use it? And this is the one that we hear all the time on product. They say, oh, we want to know about this and this and this with our product. And we'll ask, how are you going to use it? And if they end up at the end of that conversation saying something along the lines of, yeah, we actually wouldn't be able to do anything with it, you can still use it for marketing, but you're not going to use it for product shaping. And that's why I did mention the distinction with SaaS companies. They just operate in a very different world, the digital world. But with the product features and the pricing, marketing can be very dialed in. And the marketing department has more data than any department in the organization, though the product team is catching up rapidly. Now, within the marketing data that goes into this dimension, where can you find it? Competitive intelligence is so plentiful in this world. There are whole tools. If you've never used SpyFu, if you've never seen Moat, those are tools that will just show you. Moz is another one. Exactly what your competitors are doing online, what technology they're using, what automation tools they're using, what their banner ads actually look like across the entire internet. There's tons of competitive intelligence data out there for understanding and profiling your competitors' customers. Your own digital ad performance, all these digital platforms, Google Analytics, Facebook, their Facebook Ads Manager, the Twitter ads, LinkedIn ads, all of them have wonderful ways to interface with the data and pull it so that you can understand what's going on with your ad effectiveness. Now you've got to be able to track that further down your pipeline, further down your customer journey. But the data is there in marketing. Social profile data. Now this is different than you have a Facebook page as a business, and then you have Facebook ads as a business. Those are 2 different systems within Facebook. You have data from both. The data that you get differs. Website pathing data, Google Analytics is the de facto tool. You might have Site Catalyst from the Omniture days, and now with the Adobe Cloud. HubSpot, there's a lot of things that will show you site pathing, how people are behaving on your website. And those are powerful. HubSpot is definitely my favorite out of all of them. And then offline and traditional ad data. You just have to quantify it, but it can be included in this. And then CX research. I said I'd come back to this and I talked about its origin, its type of data origin is mostly survey. It's primary research. You're generating the information yourself. And it really comes in 2 basic flavors. Qualitative methods, which are faster and cheaper and quantitative methods like surveys. And the links here in the bottom left are our separate lectures on those two approaches. I'm not going to go into much detail about what they are. You can go watch those if you're interested. I will say that as time continues to go on, every day I fall more in love with qualitative methods. I just think that most of the business problems that organizations are trying to solve are so big. They're not super little, tiny, narrow things like what should we charge. That's a very narrow problem for a business. There's often larger, bigger problems. And qualitative methods can get a very good understanding of those so fast. 30 days if you're really efficient, for sure. You can go conduct a dozen or two of these qualitative interviews in 30 days. It's just such a fast way to get at the broad stuff. But there are other approaches. You can't do DCM this way. You can't get really good attitudinal data from a customer experience survey with 15, 20 people. You're going to need more. So they both have a place, but like I said, I'm just falling more in love with qualitative methods every day because as far as their actual applicability, they're so much more powerful. They're just fast. And that's their benefit. In a world that's moving where customer preferences like the Hummer just come out of nowhere, fast information is better than highly precise information 9 times out of 10. Well, what analytics would you even use? So you go out and you collect all this data on pricing and preferences and marketing and CX, and you profile, create this elaborate profile. You've got this massive database with multiple dimensions for every single customer. Okay, it's great that you've reached that point, but you have to turn it into something that the organization can act on now. And this is where analytics comes in. The goal that you should put up on the wall and remember forever is understanding every customer as an individual. We're not there yet technologically. You can understand a lot of customers at a personal level. You're not going to get every customer, no matter how much you try. I'll talk about this in a minute with sampling. We're back to the totality component of data. You can profile these individual customers across 4 dimensions. Maybe you only get 3 on one. Maybe you get 4 on a whole bunch of customers, but you really are only getting 2 on another whole group of customers. You don't understand them all to the full scope as an individual. But this is why you're profiling. This is the goal, ultimately. And technologically, we will get to this point. We're getting close. We're getting so close that governments, despite, again, everything that's happening in the world, are jumping in and getting laws passed to protect your data. So this means you'll have to sell for groups right now. And that's fine. You're still going to fill out your profile as completely as you can, but you're going to then create subgroups out of it. And this is because you will always be sampling. You're not going to reach all of those individuals. The most powerful groups are the personas because you can run simulations with them. They guide understanding. I said before, they're definitely one of the best frameworks. Now, the goal of creating these personas, and I'm about to introduce an analytical method called clustering. That's the actual analytical tool you're going to use to create these groups. But the purpose of these groups is to make them as individually similar within a group while simultaneously as different across groups. So this visual will run an iterative process. This is the k-means clustering algorithm. What you're seeing is that the yellows are as similar as possible while being simultaneously as dissimilar from the reds and the blues. And clustering goes through a whole iterative process. You can have 100 iterations, and you'll start to see yellows will become blues and reds will become yellows, and it will keep searching the data set to maximize and minimize those two things, similarity and difference simultaneously. There are really 4 clustering methods you should know are available to you, and I don't think that you'll be able to tackle these. Maybe you're a data scientist, maybe you're an armchair data scientist. I think correspondence analysis is within your grasp right now for everybody. It's not very hard and it's really powerful. You basically are looking for distance measurements between things. It's not hard. That can be done with qualitative interviews. It can be done with quantitative surveys. You cross a different threshold when you start to move into things like wards, which is a hierarchical clustering method. K-means is the one that I showed you before, and it is different than k-nearest neighbors. So the difference is that k-means is for finding the clusters, and then k-nearest neighbor would be predicting which cluster somebody belongs to, is the best way to describe it. And then you have my personal favorite, and this one is definitely becoming more popular with all of my data science friends, is DB scan. And one of the most succinct, elegant, concise YouTube videos I've ever seen. If you follow that link, it's 4 minutes. And it is well done to explain clustering in general, but the DB scan in particular. I think you need a data scientist. You need a good analyst to do wards or k-means. That stuff's available through SPSS or even Excel plugins. You could get a good business analyst who could help you with correspondence analysis and wards and probably k-means. K-nearest neighbor, which is about predicting, though. It's a little bit of a different problem, and we're going to talk about it here at the end. But k-nearest neighbor and DB scan, you're probably going to need to actually hire a data scientist. There's different types of data scientists. That's also something you can get from our blog if you go look at the Creating a Data Culture lecture. Okay, so you take these different dimensions and these different variables from those, and you pour them into this system, and you run these clustering algorithms, and then you're produced with these groups. And it'll just go back through and it'll assign, hey, person 1 is in this group. They're in group 1. Person 2 is in group 5. Person 3 is in group 3. Person 4 is in group 1. Person 5 is in group 1. Person 6 is in group 2. And then you have to go look at the characteristics of group 2 according to all the variables that you used for the clustering. And then you got to describe it, because if all you do is just dump that information on people, they will have no idea what's going on. And this is where the persona framework gets its power. You need a human face. This is where empathy really does matter. How empathetic do you feel for the creepy guy coming through the slide? Is that different than a smiling person? Is that different than people of different ages, genders, ethnicities, all the demographics that most CX research is based on? You have to put a human face to this. Demographics are a component, psychographics are another, but the more data that you have in the profile to include in that clustering, the broader the picture, the more complete the picture you'll have about them as an individual. You don't have to stop once you know a persona based on a cluster from the dimensions of your profile. You're going to get some values. Those should be shared with the organizations at that point. You really should. The CRM is the best place to put this. Just go add a new column to the data set, match up individual customers with their persona type and a description of that persona type, and you can push it right into the CRM where the whole organization has visibility to it. Services teams take a call, they know what kind of persona they're dealing with. Sales teams take a call, they know what kind of persona they're dealing with. Marketing knows what personas they're targeting and why, because they're showing up later in the funnel. Using this profile data requires you share the information back with the rest of the organization once this is done. Okay? But I said this isn't a one and done process. And even if you only run it once, there are still predictive tools you can build based on the clustering you've done that will allow you at different stages in that customer journey to predict what persona somebody is. So just based on the marketing channel or which ad they're starting to engage with, you can make an initial prediction. And then based on how they act on your website once they've clicked an ad, you can update their persona. You can recluster and update their persona. Then they're handed off to the sales team as a sales qualified lead. And the sales team nurtures them for 6 months. And over that period, they're changing the type of persona they might be. And then they become a customer and they actually start using the product and repurchasing and recommending. And they can be recategorized. You can do that every stage of the way with automated tools. This is not something that human teams should do. Even if you can get a human team to do this process repeatedly, that is inefficient. Have them do it once, twice, maybe 3 times, and then ask them to automate it and move them on to another problem. The process of collecting the information on a customer to build a complete profile, pulling sections of that profile to clustering, and then looking at the results to create a persona, and then pushing that information back to the organization is absolutely automatable. And so it's great to have a data science team actually go through this a few times before you automate. It's going to save you a lot of time and headache because they'll know the actual stages. But at some point, this needs to be handed off to a machine and a predictive component needs to be built into it, and you've done all the steps to do it. We call them typing tools. It's not really necessarily the best term. For years, we've tried to search for another. If you have a great idea after I describe this, you want to send it to me, we'll give you some sort of royalty on it. But the typing tool approach is, once we know what data we're going to use to cluster you and what algorithm we're going to use to cluster you, we can automate that process and predict. This is where we move into classification now. This is where from k-means we go to k-nearest neighbor. Now we're going to, given any information we can get on you for those variables, we're going to predict what persona you are. So let's wrap up. What did we cover today? We talked about those benefits, right? Look at Zuckerberg's in front of Congress and the EU is passing laws on protecting your data and assigning to you as an individual. This is highly valuable information. And right now, many businesses are not doing anything with it at all. And you can derive huge benefits as an organization by being an early mover. But you have to create that broad picture, that full profile of the customer. All the information you can possibly collect legally, by the way. I'm not talking about anything that's dark web stuff. I'm talking about legal information that's out there and available to you. And then once you have it, well, what are the dimensions? What are the metrics that you're going to derive from those dimensions? Right? You're going to have product data, you're going to have pricing data, you're going to have marketing data, you're going to have CX data. What are you going to do to pull information from those profiles to create something else? Personas, user stories, compliance reports. You have to know what metrics you're looking for. And then once you know those metrics, what's the analytical approach you're going to use to create these data-driven profiles? You might represent them as personas, but you're using analytics to extract insight from the full profile or from a subsection of the profile. What method are you going to use? Are you going to use correspondence analysis because it's really quick and you just need to understand broad level stuff? Or do you really need the precision of something like DB scan that warrants hiring a data scientist? And with that information, what about, that's built on other information from the preferences of the product stuff or the pricing. How are you going to go get that information? And what analytical method are you going to use? You use Q-sort there, or you use DCM there. Those are decisions you'll have to make. If you use the SMART goals method that we've laid out in other parts of this lecture series, you'll be able to walk through that pretty successfully. Next time, we're going to talk about accelerating CX research with agile methods. We've talked about this already for product developers, but within CX, it's not just that the data quality is pretty low. It's also that it takes a really long time to get it, and there are other approaches that are much faster. Again, qualitative, just as a starting point, will be much faster than a quantitative survey. With that, we'll open up for any questions that people have. Thank you for those who joined us. It will be April, what is that, the 26th? April 26th, I think, is 2 weeks from that. You can register at the same emperitas.com/lecture link. And looks like we might have a question. Nope, we got one here.
A very basic SAS, other than the statistical stuff.
SAS? Are you talking about programs other than SAS?
You mentioned SAS.
I think I mentioned SPSS.
Oh,
I might have said SAS. I
thought you were talking about.
Oh, when I said SAS, I'm sorry. That's software as a service company. So it's actually SaaS. Yes.
SaaS.
Yes. And they write it to be cool. It's uppercase S, lowercase a, uppercase S. And it stands for software as a service or a subscription sometimes. But the idea here is that, the old model with software was the premise idea. I'm going to sell you Windows and you're going to install it on your machine. It's going to live there.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll operate with it on your computer. Well, getting information back from those systems was really hard. Mm-hmm. So I think Adobe was one of the earliest movers in this. And it's probably because they were already keyed into the idea of watching data. It's why they bought Omniture and built Marketing Cloud. And they were one of the very first who said, you know what? I think also piracy, by the way, had something to do with this. The rise of Napster and the ability to just send around install files and fake keys, and they had no idea that you had a bad software tool or pirated version. Instead, they moved to, look, you'll connect over the internet, which was also getting faster and better in this period, and you will interface with our software through some sort of user interface, but the software itself is going to live on the other side of that. So it's not installed on your machine. You're just accessing it. And that model's been really powerful for a bunch of reasons. The most important is that in that situation, you can watch every single thing that somebody does. There's a company called, I don't know if it's Pendo or Pendio. I can't remember off the top of my head. It might be Pendo. Pendo is a tool for a lot of these SaaS companies that they use, and it records the whole session. You can watch the whole session. You can watch somebody use your software. It will also turn it into analytics and other things. There's website versions. Site Catalyst does that. There's one called 4C. That's a survey tool that competes with like Qualtrics and some others who will, again, record your actual web session so that you could go into a database and say, I want to understand Tom. And you could click on Tom and pull up the last 5 web visits, and I can watch everything you've done, just like it's your screen. SaaS tools can do that even more subtly in the background. They don't even have to ask you. They're logging every single thing that you're doing because you're interfacing with their system. So they can just machine-to-machine capture it right there. But yes, that kind of SaaS is different than the software tool SaaS. Okay, well, thanks for joining us today. I think on that note, we're going to end. We will see you on the 26th at the next one.